Salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ba'd. So we are continuing the series on inspired wisdom, which is basically covering the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And we are on the section of good advice. So basically giving good advice to other people. In Arabic, this is called nasiha. Whether you call it nasiha or you call it good advice, it doesn't really make that big of a difference. What matters is that we're supposed to give advice to others. And when we give them advice, it should be good. It shouldn't be bad. So that's pretty much the reminder. So continuing, we looked at some statements and teachings of the Prophet, peace be upon him, on this subject. The next one is that the Prophet said, أفضل الجهاد كلمة عدل عند سلطان جائر. So he said that the greatest struggle, the word uses jihad, and people are familiar with the term jihad in politics and all of that to refer to war and things like that. But the word jihad has two meanings. One of them is the linguistic meaning, and one of them is the applied meaning. So the linguistic meaning is being implied here, and that is that the greatest struggle that someone can undertake is to speak a word of justice. The word kalimatu adlin means a word of justice in the presence of a tyrannical ruler. Now, what does that mean? Right? This comes under the category of good advice, because rulers and leaders need advice, and tyrannical and oppressive rulers and leaders need a lot of good advice. Okay, so they're needed, but they are also the ones who are least likely to want to hear it, and they are also the most likely to want to reject it and punish the person who's giving that advice. So that's why now you got, on the one hand, you give advice to different type of people. You go and you tell someone, hey, it would be nice if you pray more. It would be nice if you stop stealing other people's money. Can you please stop doing that? Stuff like that. And then what you have is you have people who are more conducive. They're more open to listening. And you have people who are more close to listening. Then you have some people who they're not only close to listening to what you have to say, but when you say it, they'll actually try to harm you because you said it, because they don't even think that you don't even have the right, or forget responsibility. You don't even have the right to talk to them, right? To say something like that, and we're gonna put you in their place, right? They want to put you in your place. The most dangerous type of people are people who have power and people who have money, power, weapons, armies at their disposal. And if you try to give them advice where instead of understanding it as good advice, they're going to take it personally and be like, you're messing with me, you're telling me I'm doing something wrong. And then they're going to come and they're going to attack you. They're going to potentially put your life in danger. Now, that is why that the Messenger of Allah, he says that the best type of struggle where you actually can potentially be putting your life on the line. You could be putting your life in danger, because jihad linguistically means struggle. And in another context, it means war, right? You're fighting someone for the right cause, for the cause of Allah, like, liberating some people who are being oppressed or something like that. But the problem with that, why is that such a virtuous thing in Islam? It's virtuous because you're putting your life on the line. You could potentially die. So why is this particular type of advice that you give to someone so valuable? Because just by giving the advice, you could be putting your life on the line. And this is what used to happen in the past. There used to be people that they were very tyrannical, oppressive kings and leaders, and you'd go to them and you'd be like, you know what? I want to say something to you. So you walk into their court, and imagine you got these old style kings sitting on his throne, and he's got his bodyguards and everything around you, and they got like their swords like right behind you, right? And it's like, what would you like to say to the king? And you're like, well, I wanted to tell you to stop being so bad and oppressive to people, and high taxation, and you're taking their money, and this is not right. And if he gets mad, he'll just give a sign, and people just off with his head. You're dead. And the reality is, we used to think like, oh, this is like back in the Middle Ages, this stuff like that happens. But the reality is, we see stuff like this happening even in our day and age. We see the issues with reporters and people who are trying to cover some kingdom or monarchy or whatever it is. You make the wrong statement against them, they send assassins after you to try to potentially kill you. Recently there was a very famous scholar. He was denied entry. I mean, I don't want to publicize the incident because he told me not to say it, but very popular person. Many of you know him. You watch his lectures and everything. He was denied entry into one of the very important places in the Muslim world. Why? He said, because you said something that offended, our government. This is the problem with people, is that you say something and the ruler or the person who's in a position of authority doesn't like it, and all of a sudden you're punished. You'll be punished by, you're not allowed to visit our country. We've revoked your visa. You can never enter again. Or worse, we're going to send people to harm you and your family. We're going to send people to come and threaten you, or we'll try to kill you. So that's why when it comes to giving advice, there's obviously different levels. There are levels in terms of people who are in need of the advice. Some people, they're really not that bad. They don't need advice that badly. Some people are really bad. They need a lot of advice. So depending on how bad the person is, how much they're in need of advice, that's one range. Then there's another range, and there's another scale, and that scale is how dangerous is it to give that person advice. Sometimes you go to your friend and you be like, hey, I've noticed, you're smoking. You should really stop smoking. It's not good for your health. And all of a sudden your friend's like, I don't want to be friends with you anymore. They stop calling you. They stop talking to you. And it's like, I was trying to give you good advice. I tried to say it in a nice way and everything. So there was a risk. And people are sometimes scared even to give advice to their own friends, because there's a risk of potentially, upsetting them. And now your friendship is going to be hampered. Then sometimes your family, you try to give advice to your family. Now you're like, I don't want to be in bad terms with my own family. So now you're afraid. Should I give them this advice? Should I not give them this advice? What do I do? Now, the most dangerous level is the one who's going to retaliate, not by saying, I'm not going to pick up your phone call anymore. He's going to retaliate by saying, I'm going to kill you. That's exactly what the Prophet, peace be upon him, is talking about. The tyrannical ruler who's able to actually harm you at the greatest level gives you and is also in need of the advice the most. Why? Because the amount of harm that they can reap on the entire population, because they're a ruler, they're in a position of authority, they have a level of control, not control, but a level of influence over people's lives. So they need it the most, and giving it to them is the highest level of danger. So the Prophet's basically saying that's the greatest type of jihad you can do. The greatest struggle, because the potential for dying is very high. See, even if you're in a battle, think about this. If you're on a battlefield, primitive, imagine middle-aged battlefield, right? Your chances of survival are like, I don't know, 50-50, 70-30, something like that, right? When you go to a tyrannical ruler, your chances of survival are pretty low. Maybe they're worse than being on a battlefield, because you could just get injured on a battlefield. At least you have some armor and potentially something will miss you. You can at least strike a blow or something. At least you get a jab in or something. Here, you get nothing. It's just like, you're just going to sit there, you say one word, and then it's going to happen. And yet, throughout history, there have always been courageous people who spoke the truth in front of the most tyrannical leaders that ever existed. Sometimes the leaders accepted their advice. Sometimes they didn't, and they couldn't harm the person. I'll give you some examples. Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah was one of those people. He used to go and he used to speak openly to the rulers, and he used to tell them what they're doing wrong when these were the Tatars. Another example is Shaykh Al-Izz ibn Abdus Salam. He was a well-known scholar, specialist in the Shafi'i and Maliki schools. He's a scholar basically, very well-known personality. He walked up to one of the leaders of the time, tyrannical, and people were afraid. They're like, please don't say this thing. You're our teacher. We don't want you to die. He said, no, I'm going to come, and I'm going to come in front of these people, and I'm going to tell them the truth. And he would speak openly, and he's known in history for that. So there's people in history that are known for doing exactly this. And when you look at what they've written about them, see this person not only knowledgeable, person not only changing their community, but they're taking risks, and they're like the heroes of society. Then there are other people who are so afraid And they're so constantly scared all the time. They're like, what's going to happen to me? What's going to do? And they didn't do much. So guess what? Their biography doesn't have much either, because they're not a role model for people. Right? Another example is Imam Nawawi. Many people are familiar with Imam Nawawi. He wrote a 40 hadith collection called Imam Nawawi's 40 hadith. He wrote a book called Riyadus Salihin. Imam Nawawi was one of those people. So what happened was, I was just doing some research on it recently. Imam Nawawi lived in the time in Syria, in that area, when the Mamluks had taken over the government at the time, and they were in charge now. So what they did was, they went to the people of Syria and they said, we have controlled this region now. So now that we've taken over this region, all the lands that belong to the people who were living there for decades, they said, you need to show us proof of a deed that this land belongs to you. If you can't show us written proof that this land belongs to you, the government is claiming it and it belongs to the government, and we will redistribute it how we want. The people went to Imam Nawawi and they complained. And they said, look at this, new government. They're trying to take all of our lands. This is too much of a burden. This is not fair. We've been living here for decades, and now the government wants us to provide documented evidence that this land belongs to us. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, we've been living here, and now they're like, produce a proof that you own this land, and it needs to be documented, official government seal. Otherwise, they're going to confiscate the land. So they went to Imam Nawawi. Imam Nawawi sends a letter to the Sultan, Baybars, and he's like, what you're doing is, here's a long letter, what you're doing is unjust to the people, and it's wrong, and you need to stop it. You need to fear Allah. You're supposed to be a Muslim leader. How dare you do this to the people? Sultan sends a letter back to his Islamic university where he works. And they said, fire this guy. Fire him. Get rid of this guy. He's not allowed to be in this school anymore. So they're like, no, don't worry. We got the scholars back. He said, first of all, this guy doesn't even take a salary from us. He just works on the side, right? Second of all, this is not a guy you can fire. Like, it's just not possible. He's like the most popular teacher in the entire school. Our whole population is going to be upended. So they're just like, there's nothing we can do about it. Sorry, sent the letter back. You handle it between him. After a while, the Sultan had to yield to poor Imam Nawawi, who didn't have any money, very, very poor guy and everything. And he said, okay, fine. I'm going to go ahead and remove this restriction. You guys don't need to prove your thing. So a scholar like Imam Nawawi, sitting there poor, sitting in his little room, writing books and all of that, went against a guy who has an entire army of hundreds of thousands of warriors at his disposal. He was brave. He risked his job. They threatened his life, but he survived. And now he becomes a hero. So he was engaging in this kalimatu adlin, and he was engaging in this afdalul jihad, the best form of jihad that we can do. So not everyone needs to go ahead and get to this level. Not everyone has to put their life in danger, but there do need to be some individuals who are brave, who are going to stand up to people who are doing something wrong. And this was encouraged by the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and it comes in the general category of good advice. Now, if you can't do this, at least, at minimum, don't shy away from the lower risk or medium risk things or lower risk things, because sometimes if you shy away so much, then who's going to give advice and how are things going to get corrected? We have some responsibility we have to do. So that is this hadith. Any questions on this? Yeah.
So is this a jihad thing? Is this mentioned like in the Quran, or is it mentioned in the hadith, or how is it that these people, do what they do?
Okay, so jihad just means struggle, right? It means struggle.
I've heard of the term like jihadis and like things like that.
Yeah, this is all politics, right? So the thing is, jihad has two connotations. One, it means struggle. When you engage in something difficult, that's tough to do. That's mentioned in the Quran and the hadith. The second one is that there were times where the Muslim community was attacked. And when the Muslims were fighting, even the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was fighting, like in the Battle of Badr, in the Battle of Uhud, where people are trying to wipe out Islam completely. That fight, because it was done for Allah and it was done for the Muslim community, it was done to remove oppression in the land, that was considered to be a just jihad. or a righteous jihad. That's mentioned in the Quran, it's mentioned in the Hadith. As for the politics and people claiming jihadis and all that stuff, it's all politics. If someone is doing something in the right way with the right intention, then it's going to be accepted by Allah. If someone is doing something in the name of Islam that is wrong, you could put whatever title you want. You can call it a crusade, you can call it jihad, you can call it oppression, you can call it freedom fighting, you can call it enslaving other people, whatever you want to call it, it's wrong. So we should not judge people or incidents by the words that are applied to them, because that's the way the media works. The media just repeats the same word again and again and again, and you just all of a sudden you're like, oh, you hear that word now, and you're like, oh no, what does that mean, right? So my suggestion to people is ignore the words and focus on the actions. If the actions are in line with the teachings of Islam, they're good. If the actions are not in line with the teachings of Islam, they're bad. Simple as that. Okay. Other questions? Yes. Mm.
There's this, incest and this and that, and nobody really asks those types of questions. But I noticed that when it comes to Islam, of the pillar, one of this should be to educate yourself. There's always a defense that Muslims are sort of asked to project to the world, or asked to sort of, you come up with the answer, and if you don't have the answer, then this must be it. And I find that when I teach Islam willingly, it is probably the most scholarly, it's philosophical, it's scientific, it's scholarly, it's the most decent thing I've ever seen. But when you say the word like jihad, the media has spun that to mean bombs. And it's far from that.
Yeah.
So if you're getting fed from, talking heads on television and not getting to the Latin like root words of things, or the Arabic of things, you can just fed anything.
Yeah, excellent reflection. Yeah, so the reflection was basically just be careful of what the media says. And oftentimes it's like Muslims have to defend themselves because there's a lot of anti-Islamic propaganda, anti-Muslim propaganda. So we have to be careful of that, yes. And speaking out against that, it could be a type of struggle as well. Because if you speak against certain media outlets, they can, cancel your contracts and get you at work and have all sorts of other problems. So good. All right, the next hadith, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, Al-mu'minu mir'atul mu'min. He said that a believer is like a mirror for another believer. So a believer is like a mirror for another believer. So there's supposed to be a mirror. So what does that mean? So you have two Muslims. One of them is supposed to be a mirror for the other one. So what is that supposed to mean? So the scholars explain. They say, well, what does a mirror do? If you think about it, when you use a mirror, you look at yourself in the mirror. What is your function? What is the function of that mirror? What do you normally do? If you wake up in the morning, you're getting ready for work, you look in the mirror. Why do you look in the mirror? To improve yourself. You improve your appearance. You look and you see, oh, my hair is not like this. Oh, I got something over here on my shirt. Let me make sure that this is going to be correct. Because you improve yourself and you recognize the defects in yourself that you would not have been able to see without the aid of the mirror. And that's where this hadith comes in. It comes in because it's teaching that sometimes you cannot see the problems in yourself and another person can see them. And when they point them out to you, you should be grateful and you should be thankful, assuming that they're actually identifying the problems correctly, right? So sometimes you're going to have people, they give you advice and the advice is not good advice. You say, okay, Advice cannot always be 100% correct. Not everyone's going to judge every circumstance and every situation correctly. But when they do give you good advice, and when they do point out something that's beneficial for you, maybe you would not have been able to see it yourself. So you have a two-step process. The first step process is to think about very deeply, is this accurate, what they're telling me? Right? Because if you accept everyone's statement about you, it's possible that you just start so much negativity bogging you down, because not everyone's going to give you a correct assessment. But the second step is you say, okay, well, this is accurate, this is correct. Now, what can I do about it? Now, how can I actually improve myself? How can I better myself? So that's why it's mentioned that a believer is a mirror for another believer, because they have this responsibility of being able to fulfill a certain task that you would not have been able to accomplish yourself. And that is getting advice that you would not have been able to see for yourself. But there's a second aspect to it. When you look at yourself in the mirror, do you do it in public or do you do it in private? Usually you do it in private, right? Most people, you see them in their car or something like that, they're looking at the window and they're checking their facial print, and then someone car pulls up next to them, all of a sudden they're just waiting, car drives away, okay, and they continue doing the whole, mirror thing and all of that. So the thing is, when you're trying to figure out your own defects, you don't want to be doing that in front of other people. You wouldn't be like looking in the teeth and stuff like that. You don't want other people to see that, but you do that yourself. So we learned the same principle, that when you're giving advice, one of the most important things to be careful of is to make sure you're doing it in private. This is a big mistake that people go, I want to tell you something, but then there's like 4 other people listening. And you say, what, that's just it's gonna hurt the person's ego. It's gonna hurt their honor, right? Even if it's accurate, it's gonna be like, why do you have to tell me in front of other people, right? So it's best if you're gonna be correcting someone or telling them something that, could potentially come up, just be perceived as like harming their ego, you do it on a private level. You don't do it publicly. And the last thing is, right, this idea of giving advice, I think we covered it in another hadith already, but it has to be sincere. And sincere means that you actually care about the person and you're not simply venting. Because a lot of people, what they do, they vent their frustration out. They say, I'm just giving you advice. It's like, well, no, you seem so mad. If you're mad when you're giving advice, it may be that you're venting your own frustration and you're not actually giving advice. Or maybe it's like a mixture of advice and frustration. And that's why when you give advice, you should be very calm and very composed, and you should be thinking about the sincerity of helping this other person. This is not about you. You can go and you can, yell at a wall or something first, vent your frustration at something else, and then go give the advice to the person. It should not be a mixture of venting and advice together. They should be separated together, because then they're going to be interpreted in the wrong way. So this is when it comes to the idea of a believer is like a mirror for another believer. We should remind each other. We should mention other things to people. And there's 2 aspects to it. One is that we should not shy away from saying something when something is clearly wrong, right? We should not shy away from telling someone, hey, you're smoking is not good for you, or you're doing something that's harmful. You should not shy away from that. The second thing is that we should learn to be open to accept advice, because people are very sensitive, and oftentimes they immediately start feeling attacked. And what happens is, if people have trauma in their past and they've been yelled at by family members or friends in the past or something like that, it's automatically when someone starts giving advice, you start hearing that voice as the voice that was yelling at you and screaming at you, and you're like, the same way that those people attack me, this person's attacking me, because the words seem similar. And that's where we need to work on 2 things. Number 1, we need to work on healing ourselves from previous trauma. And number 2, if you're dealing with someone who's had a difficult life, they come from a tough environment, they've been through a lot of garbage, people have said so many horrible things to them, you have to deal with them in a much gentler manner. So there's an aspect for the advisor and there's an aspect for the advisee, that they should take these things into consideration. Questions on this hadith? Okay, next hadith. The Prophet, peace be upon him, next chapter, so on speech. in terms of the things that we say and the things that the way in which we speak. The Prophet said, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir falyaqul khayran aw liyasmut." Whoever believes in Allah and the last day and the afterlife should either say something good or keep quiet. So what does this mean? The first thing is that this is a style in which the Prophet used to speak. He used to say, whoever believes in Allah and the afterlife should do such and such thing. So he said, whoever believes in Allah and the last day or in the afterlife, they should be good to their neighbor. Whoever believes in Allah and the afterlife, they should do this. Whoever believes in Allah and the afterlife, they should do this. So why is he picking this? There's so many things that he could have picked. Because Muslims are supposed to believe in, they believe in Allah, they believe in the books, they believe in the angels, they believe in all the prophets, they believe in the last day, they believe in fate or qadr, decree. They believe in so many things. Why would he isolate these two particular things? Why select these two things in particular? Well, number one, belief in Allah is the foundation of Islam, and belief in Allah is supposed to change your behavior because you believe in Allah, because you believe in Allah the right way that you're supposed to believe in. This is not just about you anymore. So when you do things and you say them not only because it's like the right thing to do objectively or ontologically or whatever, but you look at you're doing it because you know there's an aspect that Allah is watching you. So if Allah is watching you and he's listening and he knows everything that you're doing, now you're going to be on guard. And the second thing is the afterlife. He mentions the afterlife because that's when people are going to be held accountable. They're going to be accountable on the day of judgment for each and every single thing that they said. So he's saying if you really believe in Allah, which is the foundation of Islam, and you really believe that you're going to stand in front of Allah and be judged and be accountable for everything you did and every single thing that you said, then you should do this. So it makes sense. It's very appropriate, right? Rather than saying, whoever believes in Allah and the angels. What does the angels have to do with anything? Whoever believes in Allah and Prophet Noah. What does Prophet Noah have to do with this advice? So he's saying something very specific because belief that you're going to be judged and that there is an afterlife and you're going to be rewarded or punished based upon what you've done is going to influence your behavior. You believe in that and you remember that, it's supposed to influence your behavior. And if you don't, then you'd be like, what's the point? I don't care. If I can get away with it, I'll say whatever I want. I'll say all the bad things that I want. And there's no consequences. There's no other intrinsic motivation. If the intrinsic motivation to be good is not sufficient for me, I don't need any other motivation. So that's the first thing. The second thing he says, whenever you speak, there's three logical options. You can either say something good, you can say something bad, or you can say nothing. There's really no other thing. I mean, you can say saying something neutral could kind of be like, nothing is really neutral. Everything is either a little bit bad, a little bit good. It's like appropriate. Saying something, asking someone, hey, how are you doing today? So, well, that's neutral. No, it's actually like on the good side. If you say, you know what, hey, anything you do is usually slanted a little bit on the good or on the bad side. So he's saying that there's three possibilities whenever you speak. One of them you don't speak. One of them you speak something good. One of them you speak something bad. And he goes, for a believer, you eliminate the other possibility. If you believe and you know that you're going to be held accountable, just say something good or be quiet. It's a beautiful way of putting it because it's like, when you look at it from a logical perspective, Aristotle was one of the Greek philosophers who kind of like to categorize things. And they talk about when you speak in logic and you define categories. And then if you eliminate one category, it helps lock you into these categories. So this is exactly what the Prophet is doing. He's saying that there's three logical categories that could exist when it comes to whenever you decide to open your mouth, there's like three buckets. And it's like, you know what? I can say something good. I cannot say anything. I can say something bad. So remove this bucket. The desire to say something bad, just eliminate it. A believer doesn't do that. And yet, we still have that temptation. Sometimes people are just so tempted. It's like, you know what? I see this all the time. People are like, I want to say something. And it's like, I have a feeling, just the way in which you started, I can tell what you're going to say is bad. And it's like, you know what? If it's bad, don't say it. No, I'm going to say it anyways. It's like, why? Why would you do it? Because you're tempted. You're like, no, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. You're not going to like it. No one's going to like it, but I'm just going to say it anyways. Why? Why? Because you can't control yourself. The problem is many people, they can't stop themselves. They cannot control themselves. And they know that they shouldn't be doing it. So the Prophet is hammering this idea. And he's like, you know what? Being quiet is better than saying something bad. And for a lot of people, they're like, but I can't stay quiet. Well, you should. If you can't say something good, it's better that you stay quiet. So this is a general principle we should adapt if necessary, inshallah. Questions on this hadith? Yes, sir.
Well, I have something to say. As far as like this goes, like 100%, I agree with it, and I also respect, like where it says in the Quran to like have like the utmost respect for your parents or your elders or whatever was in that situation, for example. And so I feel like my situation at home is kind of, and I want someone of an educated, of education in Islam to give me their perspective or what they would think to do. I feel like my situation at home is kind of like Muhammad, peace be upon him, and like when he was in the battles and he was like, he was not fighting back until Allah said so. And then, everybody's like, oh, when are you gonna fight back? When are you gonna fight back? And eventually he like, Allah did what he can. And I feel like with my parents at home, they're like, oh, just like constant bantering of Islam and talking down the religion and me, and like just like full on like 100% like degrading, and just like it's like totally negative, and it's like the way I've handled it is just try to keep my mouth shut as it says, and then when I absolutely need to, I'll say something respectfully or just walk away or whatever it may be. But like, how do I know, or where do I have to define the line of where to possibly stick up for myself or my beliefs, or like kind of just like ignore it and just like walk off, you know what I mean? Like,
Yep. So when you're dealing with a situation, and this applies to many people, when you're dealing with a situation where people are harming you, let's say in your household, constantly insulting you or insulting Islam, or just being very mean to you constantly, and it's getting to you. When do you respond back, and how do you respond back is really the question. So the how do you respond back is clear from here, right? The way in which you respond, it should be a good response, right? It shouldn't be insulting someone back. Like, oh, you insult me, I'm going to insult you back. That's not an option. So you respond back in a nice way. When do you stick up for yourself? When do you defend? Well, you need to pick your battles, and you need to realize that sometimes it's worth responding to at least protect your own honor and your own dignity, or maybe stand up for your religion or something like that. But you can't do it every single time if it's going to keep falling on deaf ears. So what I tell people is, you know what, once in a while, when it's building up and you're like, I can't take this anymore, give a response back and say, you know what you're saying is not right. And I think it's unfair what you're doing. And you should really reconsider. And if it falls on deaf ears, okay, you know what? I can't keep doing this. I'm going to take a break. Take a 1 week break. Take a 3 week break. Take the break that you need. And then you're like, okay, now it's been a while. Let me try again. Maybe something has changed. And you try again. And if it doesn't work, I'm going to take a break again. So just go with breaks and then try, and breaks and try. And every time you say something, remember it's going to be in the good category. That's my advice, inshallah. Okay, other questions on this hadith? Okay, next hadith. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, كَفَى بِالْمَرْءِ كَذِبًا أَن يُحَدِّثَ بِكُلِّ مَا سَمِعَ. Okay, it's enough to be a lie if you relate everything you hear. Okay, so it's enough to be a lie, or it's enough to consider a person to be a liar if they narrate everything that they hear. So this basically warns us about gossip. Okay, gossip is how does gossip occur? Gossip occurs when people talk a lot about other people and say a lot of things. Oftentimes, a lot of it's true, and then some falsehood comes in and mixes in there, or there's so many things that are being said, that some aspect of it gets misunderstood by others. And now that becomes a problem. So what the Prophet is advising, he's saying that if somebody, you or somebody else, if everything you hear, you have to go and start telling everybody else, it's very likely that it's going to end up, one of these things that you do is going to end up spreading a lie across the board. Because if someone keeps on conveying information to others of everything that they hear, so and then some people are like, they're like broadcasting stations. Someone comes and says, you know what? Hey, I heard from Aisha, who heard from Fatima, who heard from Maryam, that this other person, was having a really big argument in their family, and the person yelled and said this bad word. Really? Oh, great. I'm going to go and call 10 people and inform them about this. So then those 10 people can go inform 10 other people and inform them about this, and none of them need to actually know any of these things. None of them are actually going to be able to help in the situation. So there's no the purpose behind this is not so that we can somehow help the situation. The purpose behind it is it's just juicy and it's tasty and it's spicy and it's interesting. And that's where we get to the idea of gossip. So the Prophet's warning, and he's like, you know what? If there's someone who just keeps on conveying every story that they come across, they just convey it to a bunch of other people. And then those people start conveying it to other people. What are you going to end up in your community? You're going to end up with a lot of, number one, information that not everyone needs to know. Most people don't need to know it. And number two, when you convey it, what happens is people add a little, as they say, they add a little bit of spice onto it. So you hear the story, and then you tell the story, someone is focusing, and you exaggerate the way in which you tell it, add a little detail here and there that wasn't really there. That person goes and tells it to someone else, add a little bit more spice, right? Because people love spice when it comes to stories, even if you don't like eating spice. So now it becomes a problem. And this is a huge issue in every single community. And in fact, if you think about it, there are people who are professionals at doing this type of thing, and they are called reporters. They're called the mainstream media, right? The media, this is what they do for a living. What they do is they find a story and they try to spin that story in whatever way. Sometimes good people in media, they try and spin it in a nice way that's going to benefit someone. Many times, many stations, they're spinning it in a way, today it's a profit motive, right? You spin it in a way that it's going to sell the most amount of papers. That's not exactly how it was, but you changed it, you modified it, you put it in a way that people are going to want to buy that thing because it became sensationalized. And previously, if a newspaper or magazine or media outlet is owned by some government entity or some personal, they'll go and insert their own opinions into that thing and they'll spin it. So people will go and take information and gossip and they'll spin it in a way that's either more entertaining or in a way that serves their own interests. And that's why it's going to spread false information in society. And now it's going to lead to many issues. So what do? One of the things you should do, two things you should do. Number one is that if this is a lie, right, it's almost like at the point of being a lie. So the Prophet's basically saying, stop conveying everything that you hear. Someone comes and says, you know what, I heard something. You know what's going on over there in that family? Be like, actually, I don't really want to know. So the first thing you do would be like, this doesn't really concern me, so I don't need to know what's going on. Do you know the guy lost his job? I didn't need to know that. I didn't need to know they lost, unless you're telling me I need to go and help the brother or sister or whatever it is. Okay, then I need to know. That knowledge helps me because I can help them. If not, if I can't do anything, why do I need to know that? So kind of default to the point someone wants to tell you a story that you don't need to know. Default to like, do I really need to know this? Then don't tell me. I don't want to hear it. See, yeah, but it's so interesting. If I don't, there's so many interesting things in the world. Tell me about the latest food that came, the latest halal restaurant that opened up. Tell me about, that's interesting too. Tell me about the new, spaceship that's, flying or something. That's interesting too. There's so many interesting things in the world. Why participate in something that's interesting, that's potentially harmful? Choose the things that are less harmful. So that's number one. Number two, if you do get the information, and I get information all the time because this is what people do. Make appointments. They tell me what's going on and this and that. What happens is you have to fact check. The best thing to do is you hear both sides of the story. So when someone comes and tells you, this person did this and they did this and they did this, then I call up the other person. I'm like, hey, Tell me what's going on. I used to, when I first started out 20 years ago, I used to be like, why did you do this? This is what most people do. They heard this horrible story. They call the other person. Why did you do this and this and this and this and this? And the person goes, why are you saying I didn't do that? But you automatically believe the first story that you heard. And if you believe the first story that you heard, now it's like you already have taken the side of the first person that filled your ear with the story. The better approach is to say, hey, I heard something's going on. Without me telling all the thing and getting upset and all that, just I want to hear your side of the story. Very calmly. So you hear the other side of the story, and most of the time you're like, oh, now I'm really understanding. Now that you hear both sides, now I'm understanding what's going on. And oftentimes you have to go back and forth, and then you start to get more information or get a third party involved or whatever it is. So there's so much misinformation in the world. We need to learn how to deal with the misinformation. One of the ways is to be cautious and not try to get involved in things that are really not our business. That's a safer way. So you don't have to sit there and do the whole investigating thing and in your heart, did this person do this? Did that person do that? And if you do have to get involved, you have to be wise about it, and you have to learn your lesson and say, you know what? I've seen dozens of situations where people gave me wrong information. And then I had to go and check with someone else. And then I realized, oh, I was only given a part of the story that was spun, like the media spinning. It was spun by an individual to benefit for some own personal benefit. So we should be cautious about these things, about speaking and about listening and about conveying. Questions on this hadith? Yes, sir.
So does this relate now to the youth or the young professional where they talk about Bitcoin and FTAs and all that, where they tell them, oh, I made so much money and this and everybody is dominant. Is that a question?
It depends on the intention. So the question is, when like young people, it's not only young people, by the way, but when people are looking into like investing in cryptocurrency and NFTs and stuff like that, and NFT is non-fungible token, for those of you who don't know, it's like this new technology and people made a lot of money on it and stuff like that. When it comes to those type of things and people share and they're like, I made this much money, you should buy this and you should do this. If it's genuine advice for the purpose of investing, it's not going to fall in this category. Because if you know what you're talking about, oftentimes people don't know what they're talking about, right? They just got lucky. So if they know what they're talking about and they're like, look, there's this new company coming out, you know, it's really strong. I'm putting a lot of my money into it. I'm a intermediate or senior seasoned investor, and I think it's a very good investment. I wanted to give you good advice on you should consider investing in this. That's perfectly fine. When it comes into I made a ton of money, just so happened, I know exactly what I'm doing. You know, you should put your money into the same thing. You're actually giving bad advice. Because if you just kind of just hit, the jackpot and you kind of got lucky, that's really what happened, then yeah, you're actually giving bad advice. But how can you stop someone from doing that? Because they themselves are deluded into thinking that they picked like the right investment and they made that money. But what they did was there was just a wave and they just, got in at the right time. And they got out at the right time. And what happens is we have a group of 10 people, you're talking about young adults and stuff. You have a group of 10 people who made, one of them's like, I made so much money. The other 9 were doing the exact same thing that the 10th guy did. And they all lost money, so they're all quiet. So the guy who's going to talk is the one who made the money. And the 9 people are going to remain quiet because they didn't strike it big. So yeah, I mean, it's we should be careful about giving bad advice and about misportraying our achievements. If you just happen to get lucky, okay, fine. Just be like, hey, that's what happened. Don't think you're going to hit it every time. It's not going to happen every time. And we should be careful of these, kind of like gambling type of investments anyways, because they're dangerous. I've seen people lose their entire life savings over these things, right? There's people who have, I was just talking to Shaykh Umar Khan the other day. He was saying when he worked for Broadcom was a really big company at the time, and he was in a division of cellular division which completely shut down. He was in the cellular division; it was going big. People put all of their money into the company because they had the ability, employees had the ability to get extra stocks and all that. They would mortgage their home and put all of the equity from their home into this thing, and they lost everything, right? Because everyone thought this is going to be the next big thing, so they put everything on the line, all the chips on the table, gambled, and many of them got killed, just completely destroyed. So you have to be wise. Investing is good. Being foolish is not good, right? And you should not put all of your eggs in one basket. That's why they say when it comes to investing, you diversify your portfolio. Portfolio doesn't just mean stocks. Diversify your portfolio across different types of investments, different sectors, some level of diversification to protect yourself. And that's what we should be doing as wise Muslims. No. Any other questions? Yeah.
What makes them
Okay, so I'll answer that after class because it's kind of like off-topic question. It's about halal loans, what makes them halal and all that. But yeah, I can answer that for you on a personal level, inshallah. Any other questions related to the hadith? All right, so let's do a few more. Next hadith, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "Atadruna mal ghiba." He asked people. He said, "Do you know what backbiting is?" Right? Or you could say gossip. And backbiting is when you talk bad about someone. So they said, "Qalu Allahu wa rasuluhu a'lam." The companions used to respond in this way. They used to say, "Allah and His Messenger know best." So usually what's happening is that the Prophet, when he would teach, sometimes he would ask rhetorical questions because it captures the attention of the audience. Sometimes he would ask a genuine question because he wants to know if the person knows the answer or not. And sometimes you can't tell. Is it a rhetorical question or does he actually want us to answer the question? So the default that the companions used to answer, usually, not always, usually they'd say, "Allah and His Messenger know best." Like, you tell us. It's not even worth us taking a guess because you and Allah are the ones who know you're the ones who are going to learn, we're going to learn from, you're going to teach us. So out of respect, they'd be like, why should I try to answer? Now, before we even move on to the rest of the hadith, this is a very good attitude to have in front of somebody who has more knowledge than you, right? If someone is an expert in a topic or something like that, you'd be like, it's like, what do you think about this? They say, well, you're the expert. You tell me, right? So when it comes to investing or something like that, someone comes and they've been investing for 40 years. They're seasoned, expert, veteran investor, and then you see like some person never invested in their life. They say, well, I think you should buy such and such stock. And people, imagine someone sitting there like, who is this person talking? What are they saying? Like, what basis are they making all these random statements and decisions? It's kind of like, it's not only like, is it disrespectful in general, but it's kind of like, why would you do something like that? You look strange and you look foolish. So the good thing is like, this is it's not a requirement, but it's kind of like good behavior to kind of understand that if someone is an expert in the field, if you're like sitting in front of a doctor, right? Imagine someone's asking you, "You know what, I have a sore throat and kind of coughing and something." The person who's expert in medicine and there's another person doesn't know a thing about medicine. You say, "Well, you know what I suggest? I suggest you do such and such thing." Well, maybe you could wait until the person who has expertise in this says something first before you like throw out your opinion. So this is what the companions used to do. They'd be like, "You know what? You're the Prophet. Allah and His Messenger, they know better. So you tell us, we're not even going to answer the question." So it was a rhetorical question. So he answers. He goes, "Let me tell you what it is. Backbiting is to mention something about another person in their absence that they would dislike." So saying something about another person, and if they hear what you're saying, they would not be happy. And they're not there. They're not listening to that either, right? So you think that's what the definition of ghiba is. Ghiba is considered to be this term called backbiting or talking bad about someone. It's literally just talking bad about someone. Now, if you talk bad about someone in front of them, that's insulting them. If you talk bad about someone and they're not there, it's just called talking. There's the word for in English is backbiting, which is so funny because outside of Islam, if you don't look at like Islamic translation from the word ghiba, probably never hear the word backbiting in your life, right? It's not even a word. The average American, I don't think that they even understand what this word backbiting means. It's almost like It's like an antiquated word. It's like fornication or adultery. So you go to average, like, go to a public high school, be like, hey guys, you know what adultery, you know what fornication is? What? What are you talking about? Why? Because technically fornication is having a relationship outside of marriage, right? That's what everyone's doing anyway. So they're like, what is this word? This is some ancient word that we used to use in the past. Same thing with backbiting. It's not really a word that people have. Why? Because these type of manners are not really emphasized in our society, which is sad, right? That's why it's kind of a strange word. I don't even like to use it, but it's because the translation is not there, because we don't have the emphasis on these type of manners in our community, unfortunately. So anyways, he says, this is the definition of backbiting, of ghiba, and you shouldn't do it. This is not what you should do. So you should not talk bad about people, especially when they're not there. Why is it worse when they're not there? It's worse when they're not there because if you insult someone or you say something bad about them and they're there, at least they can defend themselves, they can respond back, or at least if they hear what you're saying, maybe they'll be like, oh, that's true. I can maybe change that about myself. There could be some level of benefit that they're getting. When it comes to saying something bad and they're not there, that's the absolute worst thing, because now they can't defend themselves. They don't learn a lesson. They can't change themselves. It's not going to help them improve or anything like that. It does nothing. So like, let's say you're on the basketball court and you lose the game because one guy, he missed all the shots. And then you go to your friends and you're like, man, that Ahmed kid, man, he sucks at basketball. We lost because of him. But you're not telling Ahmed. So if Ahmed knew that, hey, you know what, this is what other people are saying, maybe he'd be like, oh, now I realize it really bothers people that they lost the game. I should go practice basketball more. He's not getting anything. No one's going to tell him what's going on. They're just going to say, oh, we lost the game because he sucks. He can't shoot free throws and he can't do this, he can't do that. So he gets no benefit, nor can he defend himself, nor can he say, hey, I was not feeling good that day, nor can he say, you know what, actually, I'm not that bad. Today was just a really bad day. He can't do any of that. That's what makes this even worse. So then some people were listening. And they said, the Prophet was asked by someone. He said, you know what? In kana fihi ma taqul. Right? He said, أَفَرَأَيْتَ إِنْ كَانَ فِي أَخِي مَا أَقُولُ. What if I'm telling the truth about the person? Ahmed sucks at basketball. This is reality. He's just not good. I'm speaking the truth. And the person who asked this question, they're doing what a lot of people do. When you start talking bad about someone, it's like, we shouldn't talk bad about the person. I'm just telling the truth. He sucks at basketball. I'm just telling the truth. He's really mean. He's stingy. He doesn't donate to the masjid at all. He has so much money, doesn't donate anything. Right? So, but the point is, you saying that just because it's true doesn't somehow change anything. So the Prophet ﷺ said, "In kana fihi ma taqul faqad ightabta." If you speak the truth, then that is what backbiting is. When you're talking about something true. وَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ فِيهِ فَقَدْ بَهَتَّ. And if you're lying, if you're not telling the truth and the person doesn't have that quality, then you're slandering, which is a double sin, because now you're lying and you're backbiting at the same time. So this is like what happened here is that the companions, they used to ask questions. While the Prophet is teaching, they would ask questions and they'd be like, well, what about in this situation? Isn't it okay if this, or we don't understand, why would this be a problem? And it also shows you that there's nothing wrong with asking questions. The companions used to ask questions to the Messenger of Allah to get clarification. And he would give them this clarification. And sometimes they had the wrong notion in their mind and he corrected it for them. So in this case, this is something that we need to be careful of, because it happens to a lot of people. They start gossiping, talking bad about other people. And then someone says, you know what, we shouldn't talk bad about this person. Just speaking the truth. Right? How many of you have ever heard something like this? Can you raise your hand real quick? Have you ever heard someone saying, I'm just speaking the truth, so therefore it must be okay? Right? Quite a few people have heard it, right? This is what happens. So the next time, you can just be like, you know what the Prophet said? He said, if you're speaking the truth, then that's exactly the definition of backbiting. Congratulations. You've understood exactly what it is now, right? And then you stop. So we should be very careful of this type of backbiting, because Allah has mentioned this type of behavior in the Quran as being like eating the flesh of your dead brother or your dead sister. It's really bad because what you're doing is you're harming them at such a level, and it's something that's like something that you would be repulsive. You wouldn't want to eat human flesh, let alone someone who you're close to, because you're harming them. So we need to be careful. There's very few exceptions to backbiting. The few exceptions would be, number one is if you need to share some information about a person because it's going to greatly affect them. So if someone is asking for employment reference or letter of recommendation, right? People ask me to write letter of recommendations all the time. I can't just be like, I don't want to say that he's a bad student, because that would be backbiting. Of course it would be. But if someone's getting a reference or something like that, you have to tell them the truth. So if someone came and did something in your home, repaired your car, and they did a horrible job, and now someone comes to you, hey, should I hire this person to fix my car? Well, I don't want to say anything bad. Person messed up my car. But we have to tell them. So if you have to warn someone about something, it doesn't fall into the category of backbiting when there's a need. But does that mean that you go and you tell the whole world? No. You just tell the people who need to know, specifically those people who need to know. Okay? Questions about this hadith? Okay. So 9 o'clock, we will end it at that, inshallah ta'ala. Any questions about anything we've covered or hadith or anything like that? Okay, then we will see you next week, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nastaghfirukallah wa natubu ilayh. And if we could have everyone just please help pick up the chairs so we can clean up this room. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.